Do you want to know what it really takes to scale a franchise from a single location to an $87 million a year empire? I'm your host, Alex Smersnak, and today I'm sitting down with Jon Toy, a former CPA turned franchise operator who used strategic mergers to 10x his business. Jon is what we call a MAMBO, a multi-unit, multi-brand operator overseeing a massive portfolio, including FastSigns and Rolling Suds. Today, we're going to walk through how Jon scaled his operation from just $2 million in annual revenue 7 years ago to over $80 million in 2024 alone. We're going to break down the truth about partnerships, how being young and dumb can actually be a superpower, and the roadmap to building a $100 million a year portfolio. Incredibly excited for this one. Let's get into it. Jon, I'm incredibly excited to have you on the show. Why don't we go ahead and jump right in? I'd love for you to give us a quick intro on who is Jon Toy and what franchises are you currently an owner of?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate you having me on the show. You and I and some of your team met briefly at Main Street Summit, which is the awesome opportunity for any operator. And now I'm excited that they're adding in franchise stuff. So it's excited to be a part of that. And just a quick sidebar before I jump into that, but I'm actually glad your service didn't exist maybe 10 years ago, because you probably would have sold my business and then I would have experienced all the growth we've had. So you guys are doing a great thing in the market, and just really appreciate what you guys are doing for franchisees.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so my name's Jon Toy. I grew up in Oklahoma and went to school in West Texas, Abilene Christian University, and became an accountant right out of school and worked in that field for a while, but didn't take me too long to jump into the franchise world. So been doing this for over 20 years now, and we currently have a portfolio of companies that we are involved with. Our main one is FastSigns. And a lot of people say, signs, what is that? And you see them everywhere and everybody thinks it's something different, but that's our primary holding that we have. We currently have 3 territories and a 4th one in development right now. We also have a Rolling Suds franchise in which we have 9 territories and 4 trucks on the road in those 9 territories. And we're expanding into 3 more down in Northern Maryland, which will make 12 total. So 2 franchise brands that we're in, and then we have some investments in some other companies, and we also operate at a global staffing company that services the FastSigns franchisees. So that's our current portfolio of companies. There are 3 partners that are involved with this, and it's been an amazing blessing and a great ride these last several years.
Oh, that's amazing. So you're what the industry calls a MAMBO, a multi-unit, multi-brand operator.
Yes, I haven't heard that term. I like it.
I hadn't heard it until last year, so now I gotta talk the talk and have the lingo. But you're in a place where I think a lot of people aspire to be, where it's like, hey, you started out doing this, in accounting, corporate career. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were also at Ernst Young, right?
I was, yeah, doing the audit track, and they tend to either keep the ones who can stay the longest or run the best ones out. I think I'm on the second track, so we'll see.
Or you ran yourself out.
That's right.
I was also at EY, and similar probably experience where I was just like, hey, this was maybe a good early part of my career, but I knew mm-hmm. I needed to go do something else. And so I'm curious for you. You're at EY, you're at this brand name, big mm-hmm. Four consulting. A lot of people probably dream of having this job, and you're like, I'm going to go do the franchise. I mean, what walk us through that? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Did something, what sparked it, I guess, for you?
I asked myself that question a lot of times. It's a great job. It was paying well out of college, newly married, living in a new market, and was working there. And for whatever reason, just wasn't finding the right gratification out of that work. I was good at it. I had a good team I worked with. But I grew up in a small town. My dad was a chiropractor, had his own practice. All I knew was small business, small town kind of environment. And it was just felt weird to me with cubicles and layers of bureaucracy and people who were in charge of different things. So I just was looking for something different, and wanted to try something else. I also had some friends who graduated with me and were working in the same field, and they were kind of getting itchy to go do something else. Their drive probably was just make more money. It may have been in the back of my head. It's always in the back of your head somewhere. But I think also it was just something that was allowed me to have a little more flexibility, a little more freedom, and kind of control what I owned and what I was doing, because it was all I'd seen, growing up. So that was kind of the thinking that got me to say, let's try something different, even though I'd only been in it for, a very short amount of time. We're a little bit unique too, in that I don't, and we can talk about franchising in just a minute, but we had a family member who was already an owner of Fast Signs. And so
Okay.
they had kind of jumped into that brand. We're doing very well. They lived back where we now live now on the East Coast. And we had wanted to relocate at some point from Texas to the East Coast to be closer to my wife's family. And so the opportunity kind of came through that to get involved with a franchise and with Fast Signs. But before that happened, I was looking into how do I start my own business? How do I go into business with somebody else? And so I was already down that path. I was researching some kind of unique things that were different and had that entrepreneurial bug that I just couldn't get back into the swing of audits and spreadsheets.
So something you said again, it's pretty interesting how similar yours and I's stories are. I had a dad that was entrepreneurial. He was a financial advisor, kind of eat what you kill, 100% commission. And I'm sure similar to your father, just learned a lot and you're just constantly around it and you see that, hey, this is a possible path. And I think that's the first thing that a lot of people never have that exposure. They just hear get good grades in high school to get good grades in college to get my Fortune 500 job. And there's no other outside influence, other than what are my peers doing or what is the majority of society doing. And so I think you and I are very fortunate in that we had mentors, role models, exposure to this alternative path. And so you get the bug, you're looking at other stuff. I'm curious, what were you looking at before franchising? Like you said, you were looking at some interesting things. Like what tools were you using to research? What things were you looking at?
I was young and dumb, and so it was funny some of the things we were doing. A friend of mine from college, we got together and we were talking about stuff. And at the time, E85 gasoline was the newest thing, right? So you're using more ethanol, you're using corn. It's a lower cost alternative. And so we had this business idea that we were going to get ahead of the curve on E85 gasoline and go around and service dealers or go to places that needed lower cost fuel fill-ups, rental car places, and somehow become an E85 thing, which was a horrible idea. It wouldn't have made us any money, but we did the research, right? So we were calling gas station owners and people that were in that field of Petroleum, and it's West Texas, so you have the chance to get all that. And they're all like, there is no money in gasoline. So I was like, okay, well, this probably isn't the best way to go. The margins are so slim on that you'd have to have another service to do. So, but we were brainstorming, right? And that's kind of what got it kickstarted. Like, wow, we can be creative and come up with whatever we want. So that was new to me. And then I also, my roommate from college, his family had a family-owned distributorship of truck accessories and aftermarket parts. And they were growing rapidly, growing very fast. And so I was going to partner with him to go open a branch out in West Texas and expand into New Mexico, Arizona, that area. So that was the other idea. It would have been entrepreneurial, but under kind of an umbrella of a family organization, but it would have allowed me to maybe have ownership down the road. I had met with the family and talked with them. So, had a couple things we were, stewing on and trying to figure out and, ultimately chose Fast Signs, but it was neat to go through that process and even now look back and say, man, I was in that flow of just figuring this out and what do I want to do and, what's going to be the best opportunity. So.
And were you exploring franchising at all, or was it purely kind of one of those forks in the road moment in time where a family member was involved in Fast Signs on the East Coast, and this just presented itself? You're like, hey, I hadn't thought about franchising, but now I am. Right. Or were you?
No,
did it cross your mind at all?
I didn't even probably know what a franchise was at that point. I would just thought McDonald's, right? Everybody thinks, oh, McDonald's is a franchise, right? Which is. But it was a very different model. And so what happened is we were in Dallas, Fort Worth, where we were living, and our family members, it was my wife's aunt and uncle, they were in town for a Fast Signs meeting. And we went out one day and had dinner, and we're walking around, and I was telling her, hey, I'm exploring these new ideas. I want to start a business, and I'm excited about it. And she had just started this business and been doing it for a couple of years now and been very successful. And she said, you don't want to start a business down here because then you're not going to be able to move to Pennsylvania and be close to family. She said, you need to start a Fast Signs and I'll be your mentor and I'll help you guys get going. And it's the best way to go. And I was like, I'm not doing a franchise. I don't even know what that is. Right. I'm like, so then I started doing the research and I was like, well, let me just see what I think of this. I had a mentor now who was going to be willing to invest in me. I had a backer, and then my father-in-law said, well, I'll help you get the loan if that's what you guys decide to do, because we would love to have you closer to us. And so it was a viable opportunity that I could now look into that didn't require quite as much startup or the challenges of not having income and different things in the very beginning to try to figure out. So that's kind of what made the jump. And then I dove headfirst into doing all the research on franchising and what is it. And so every night after work, I'm on the computer and researching stuff and looking into things and what's the market like up here where we want to move to. And then just kind of dove in and went from there. So no, I had no idea about franchising, really wasn't on my radar. Just some sort of small business is what I was kind of seeking.
And for those listening that don't know what Fast Signs is, what does Fast Signs do?
Yeah. So, our tagline is make your statement. And really that is abroad because we do really anything visual. And different fast signs have different capabilities and will service in different ways, which is the beauty of a franchise. You build your own business. You don't have to do it the exact way that every other franchisee does. But we do everything from small little stickers that you can put on the back of your computer or on a coffee mug, all the way up to huge channel letters that go on the side of a building and
Mm-hmm.
everything in between. And so most people, when I say, "Oh, I'm in signs," they say, "Oh, you mean like billboards?" Like, no, 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 we don't do billboards. That's kind of its own industry. But pretty much anything else that you can't print on a desktop printer, we get involved with, and we find ways to manufacture or service our clients when they ask for it.
So something I want to call out when you're in when you're in this exploratory part of your entrepreneurial journey, you were looking at petroleum or gas-based businesses. You're looking at aftermarket secondary trucking part businesses. You're
Yep.
looking at a signed marketing branding business. I want
Right.
those listening to hear that and really realize that you don't need to be an expert necessarily in
Mhm.
whatever it is you get into, as long as you're comfortable with problem solving and self-educating and learning. And I think you'll hear this through the rest of Jon's story, is like he's been wildly successful and probably at the time, I think it's probably fair to say, knew nothing about signs.
Not a thing.
So what
Barely knew what a sign was. So.
what was that first 6 to 12 months actually like? I know I'm asking you to go way back, but those
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
to transport yourself into what was this,
hmm
the mid 2000s,
2004.
2005?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
take us back 20-ish years. Like, what was Jon thinking? Like, was he like, oh my gosh, I did this now and I have to figure it out? And what
Yeah.
was that
Yeah.
like?
So, again, I don't know how I was so young and dumb, but I just had this picture that, like, oh, I'm going to do this, and suddenly I'm going to be making $100,000 a year, and I really probably thought that in my head that it was just going to happen, year one or year two, and so I kind of went into this thing. I had a great mentor, so I was set up for success there, and the franchise did allow me to get in the system, which I wasn't the normal fit. I was far too young for what they would normally do, didn't have any money, and was kind of starting from scratch. So it kind of put them in an interesting spot of, do we let this guy in there? But going in, I didn't know anything about signs. I had to learn all that through the franchise and through my mentor. I knew a little bit about business. I thought I was smarter than I was, probably, just because I had a CPA and I worked for Ernst Young. I should suddenly know how to like run this business. But it's a different world when those doors are open, and now you're paying bills and you're servicing customers, and you got to figure out how you're going to get this thing done on time to meet the demand. And so it was an eye opener, but I just approached it with the same optimism that I'd always had, which is this thing is going to rock and roll, and we're going to be successful, and we're going to get there. I just didn't realize how long it was going to take to kind of hit some of those hurdles that I thought would happen a lot faster.
Well, something you said, I was on a podcast yesterday. It's called, I think it's Escaping the 9 to 5. And it's, about
Mhm.
corporate escapees who are exploring what they want to do. And a theme that we talked about was, it's funny throughout your career, whether you were like you or I, who probably left pretty early in their career, or those that want to
Mhm.
do it when they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, is that these two things kind of switch. And it's early in your career, you have this like unbridled optimism, curiosity. Like you keep saying, young and dumb. I think it's just like almost like childlike
Yeah,
imagination and like naiveness. That's actually, I think, a bit of a superpower, but you might not
absolutely.
have the skill set yet. Like you're smart, you're capable, but you haven't had experience yet. And so you have part of your brain that's like very equipped to go do a startup or do something scary like this
Mhm.
because you're so confident and naive, and it's actually a strength. But then as you stay in corporate and you become late 30s, 40s, 50s, you lose that. You become kind of like,
Mm.
oh, that's just how it's always been done. I don't want to challenge the status quo. You kind of lose that like childlike curiosity and
Right,
optimism. But you now are more equipped because you have the skills to manage people and a P&L. And
right,
like, it's kind of ironic that you're better equipped, but you've lost that like, again, childlike
right.
curiosity. And so it really is like you have to attack it two different ways depending on where you are in your career. And it sounds like early on, again, you let the part of you that said, hey, I'm just going to figure this out and I'm a CPA and why not?
Mhm.
And it worked out. I mean, it took longer than you thought. I'm sure it was really
Right.
hard. And I want to talk about some of that. But
Yeah.
where you are now, I'm sure you wouldn't trade it for the world. And you're probably
No.
grateful beyond, you could have ever imagined for making that decision at
100%.
that
I like
moment
I
in
like
time.
your phrasing much better, naive with optimism, because that is the reality, right? I wasn't dumb. I was a smart kid that wanted to work hard, and I knew how to work hard because it was what I'd seen my whole life, but I just didn't know what I didn't know, right? And so
Yep.
that's where that naivety comes in, is like, well, it can't be that hard. Let's just go do it. And what's interesting is my wife, she joined me in the business very early on until we had kids, and she had no business experience. She had a psychology degree, and then she was working in education before we moved from Texas. And so FastSigns made her go to this Dale Carnegie class, to learn how to be a better speaker and have more confidence. And she's like, "Why am I doing this?" But they forced her to do it. So she was going through this class, and I remember coming back, and she told me that one of the first things they said was, "If you can look in the future and accept the worst possible outcome, then everything else is easy after that." Right.
Yep.
And so, like, I've just always had that in the back of my mind. I didn't think about that, but that was kind of just how I was. It was like, well, if it fails, it fails, right? Then we just go back and do something else, or you start from scratch. And I think you're right. Being young, I didn't have a lot of responsibility. We didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have kids yet. All these things that do get in the back of your head and create doubt. I didn't have any of that. I
Yep.
just said, this is a new opportunity. Let's go do it. And I knew I could go back to being a CPA if it did fail, or something else, right? So I think there's some of that too, that wherever you are in your career, if you're making this leap, it's like, think back out to the future and say, what's the worst possible outcome that myself, my partner, and I, whoever can decide upon, and then just work backwards, because it's so much easier if you can just accept that outcome and say, we're not going to do that, but if it happens, we're okay. Let's go forward.
I want to double down on that a little bit because I said almost an exact similar thing yesterday on that same podcast. And it was my first few years running, the first business I did after EY, I'm CEO. I've got, 20, 30 people reporting to me. Some of them are a lot older than me at the time. I'm 25. And I had a lot of that, optimism, but also doubt and kind of like imposter syndrome of like, should I be doing this? Am I allowed to be doing this? I'm
Right.
25. Right. And I would not sleep very well. And it was getting at me, right? Like, you have to sleep, you have to be focused. And I couldn't get to sleep because I'd be so anxious. And I eventually did exactly what you said and what your wife learned in that class. And it was, let's go play out every worst case scenario that could possibly happen. And I did that exercise. What happens to our investors if this doesn't work? What happens to our team if this doesn't work? What happens to our customers? What happens to me, as an individual if this doesn't work? And all of the outcomes weren't so bad. No one's dying. No one's getting, fatally injured. It's like, all right, wealthy investors might have a little less money. And yeah, of course, it's not a win for them, but they did their diligence coming into it. They will ultimately be okay in the long run. Your team is very smart. They will find other jobs. Your customers will have another solution for their laundry. And you as an individual probably learned a lot more doing this than staying at EY. And so you're actually better off, in this worst case scenario as well. So the worst case isn't so bad. After I did that, I slept. I haven't slept. I haven't woken up in the middle of the night since. It's that's such a powerful exercise. So that's why I wanted to share that experience that I had, and I'm glad you shared the experience your wife had. It's like, sit down and just think what actually happens, and you'll be surprised that this big fear and risk actually isn't as big as you might think it is.
Well, and to your other point too, I mean, I have people all the time that say, "What keeps you up at night?" And my saying has always been the same for the last 25 years: "Is, guys, I sleep well." Right. And all that means is, like, doesn't mean my brain's not going, but when I hit the pillow, I sleep, and then I get up and I get going. Right.
Yep.
And I think that is important, because I have friends and even business partners at times that struggle with that, and they can't sleep. They're wrestling. Their brain won't let them rest and go to it. And that just hasn't been one of mine. I think that's a superpower you have to develop, because otherwise you're going to struggle. Right. Your health is going to decline. You're going to go through times where you just can't make it, and you can't shut it off. And that's not healthy. Right. So you got to find that balance between life and work in some capacity. It's never an equal balance, but it has to be something that you work through. Otherwise, you won't be able to run the business effectively as a leader.
Yep, I agree. Got to get those 7 to 8 hours if you can.
Well, I still don't get that, but I sleep well when I'm sleeping.
You had mentioned something else too, that you thought, hey, how hard could this be? I'm curious. Those first few years, like what was harder than you expected, and were there any moments that you were genuinely questioning, like, shit, should we have actually done this? And I regret this.
Yeah. Well, surprisingly, one of the hardest things for me was the books, right? And here I am, the CPA that should know how to read a P&L and do everything. But I was so obsessed with customer service and sales that I just neglected a lot of the other things, because I'm like, I know that if I can get enough sales and get enough customers that love me and keep buying, we're going to be successful. but I wasn't paying enough attention to what am I doing over here to stay profitable. So I took my eye off the ball because I kept thinking if I just keep investing in things that will grow sales, it'll make all the world a difference. So that was one thing that I, definitely failed on early on for many years and had to go back and recircle and say, man, I really screwed that up. The other moments was when I started running out of cash, right? It didn't take that long before that cash balance is just going down, 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 down. And I remember having to pull out that 0% credit card the very first time and write that check to myself and say, I'm taking on this 0% for 6 months that then goes to 30%. And if I can't pay that back, I'm in big trouble. And I did that multiple times in my career. To fund the business, right? And it was all I could do because the bank wouldn't give me any more money, and I was already making loan payments that were draining my, cash after profits. So it was just, one of those things where I realized this is hard, and I have to do better at certain things to do it. Now, I was obsessed with sales, and I was obsessed with customer service, so the top line kept growing, which funded those things. But it could have easily gone the other direction if I would have said, I'm going to stop everything and fix this first. So I had to figure out how to do those things simultaneously. And I think that was another strength that I learned going on. And it's not multitasking, it's strategic tasking, right? It's doing things at the same time that are important to being effective as an operator of a franchise.
Yeah, it's like this almost 3D chess where it's like you do have to walk and chew bubble gum and do another thing, probably ride a bike at the like, it's not walking bike, but walk, chew bubble gum and something else at the same time.
Yeah.
But what's the highest leverage? What are the highest leverage things that you have to to learn to do at the same time? How did you develop that skill? Was it just kind of like brute force and getting comfortable with it, or did you read something or a mentor, or what?
Yeah.
I guess what was it that helped you kind of develop that?
So, it was a number of things that I look back at my career. So the first one was I joined a sales training course, which is another franchise, Sandler Sales Training.
Yep.
I knew nothing about sales. I was a good, I love people and I didn't mind talking and I could go push a product, but I didn't know how to do it, strategically. So I joined Sandler Sales Training. I did not have the $10,000, $15,000 to do it, but I did it anyways. He worked with me on a payment and got me in there. And that was game changer number one. They were extremely good trainer that I was connected to, one of the best in the country. And he just helped change the way I thought about business in a lot of ways. But one big thing was just starting to read more. I wasn't a reader. I did what I had to do through school and that was it. And I was good at that, but I didn't do it to learn and get better. And so I just started becoming a crazy reader and trying to consume books whenever I had extra time. And I was amazed at how much I could actually consume when I did that instead of other things that I found to take up my time. And that really helped because now I'm getting perspective from different people. And I was strategic about what I chose. I wasn't just reading any business book, but trying to find ones that would help me think about what I was and getting referrals from other people. So that was kind of a first thing that helped shift how I would think about business and get over some of these humps, the training plus reading and getting more perspective from outside. And then I think the second shift for me happened probably in 2012, 2013, after I'd been doing it for a little over 10 years. And that was learning how to be a better marketer to my customers in a one-on-one way. So I changed my whole strategy of marketing, kind of threw out what the corporate was doing and said, I'm going to do my own here locally, combined with what they're doing to be more personal to my customers at a mass scale as opposed to one-on-one. But it feels like I'm talking to them individually. So those two are kind of like pivotal shifts for me that happened. That really changed the outcome of how I did in business and continue to succeed. And then in between those two, I got connected to a peer group within FastSigns, which they were promoting, which I think is an amazing thing. And I hope all franchises have that. They may or may not. But that's a huge advantage of being in a franchise is having these other people that are in the trenches with you doing their own thing, but have a very similar story or similar experiences day to day. And so I got involved with a peer group. I had been in one, but I shifted to a new group that was a higher level. I was actually the lowest sales guy in that sales revenue in that group by a 2 factor. And I was like, why do you want me in your group? And they said, no, we really want you here. And by the end, I was the second highest and tenure in that group. So, those three things really helped kind of shape my path as I continued on prior to joining the most recent partnership with these two other guys. So that's kind of things how, what I look back and say, where are these moments that I learned to do better? Some of it was franchise aided, some of it was self aided in terms of I got to get better at where I'm struggling. And they didn't have the resources to do it. They had things, but it wasn't the right for what I needed right then. And the peer group was something they helped facilitate and grow through that.
What a cool experience on that peer group too. It's like you hear the analogy of like you don't want to be the smartest guy in the room or the fastest runner in the group because then who's pushing you. And so to get to be involved in the with the giants of FastSigns at the time or people that were much further along or bigger than you, I'm sure that competitive edge almost came out in the learning and,
Yeah.
the motivation to kind of reach and keep up with where they were. And
Yeah,
that's a pretty,
and just having people that'll shoot straight with you, right? I mean, I remember that very first peer meeting. It was brutal for me. I mean, they beat me up. Like, one guy was like, "You can't run your business with your heart. You got to run it with your wallet." Another guy said, "If you don't get out and start selling, you're going to fail." Like, I mean, they beat me up. But the reality is, the next year I grew 65%. So they
wow.
told me what I needed to
Wow.
hear to get out there and say,
Yeah.
"I better do this, or I'm not going to make it." Right? I can't just keep coasting.
There's so much evidence of this across franchising, athletics. I mean,
Hmm.
anything where you surround yourself. It is like there's some, I forget which psychologist it is, but it's like if you show me the 3 or 4 closest relationships you have, I can tell you within, a high degree of confidence, like how you're going to
Yeah.
behave and act based
Right.
on, that circle you have around you. And so I can only imagine that had a very material impact on you as an individual, an operator.
Yeah. Well, and it teaches you too to get out of your own head, right? And like, I need other perspective to get better, right? I don't know it all, and I can't know it all, and I can't just get all the information that I need. So even outside of that Fast Signs group, as I saw the success, I sought other peer groups, and so I would join mastermind groups related to marketing, and I would go to conferences and travel all over the country, and people would be like, "Why are you spending this money? Why are you out of the office? Why are you doing these things?" But I would come back with so many ideas to implement that I would just hit the ground running. And if I hadn't done those, I would still kind of just be incrementally growing versus shooting up, exponentially, as we continue to develop and implement these ideas that I get from other people and other resources that I just didn't have.
Yeah. You said something earlier about how, a big learning moment was 12 years in, and it made me think about it. Like, yeah, wow, you've been in this brand for, 2 decades. Most franchise agreements are typically a 10-year period, and then you can renew.
Yeah.
You have the option to renew from there. Like, what kept you, if that was the case, renewing, or just in general, what's kept you in the brand for, over 2 decades?
Well, mine was a 20-year agreement, so they go
Okay.
to 10-year now. So I didn't really have any other option if I wanted to do something different. But you're gonna have those moments of, what am I doing and why am I doing this, right? I know I had at least two of those, prior to joining the two others that I joined in 2022. One time I specifically put it on the market. I called Fast and I was like, I want to sell. I'm tired of this. I want to get out. And thankfully I couldn't find a buyer, and then I had to dive back in and say, well, then I better make this thing work. But you're going to experience those moments of doubt, those moments of like, what am I doing? I've been doing this for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, and I'm not necessarily where I thought I would be or where I see other people at. Even within the Fast Signs network, I had this, to use that imposter syndrome. I would walk around with the confidence like I want to be that guy, but I wasn't. And so I had to
Hmm.
just keep listening and learning. And, fortunately, early on with my mentor, she introduced me to a lot of the high players, and I got to just sit at their feet and listen, like, hey, what are you doing here? Or she'd take me to dinner with them when I couldn't probably barely afford McDonald's, but I was at the convention. She would take me to this nice steak dinner and pay for it, with these people at the round table. And I would just sit and listen. I wouldn't talk the whole meal. I was just mentally taking notes and learning these things. And so that's one thing that helped me in those darker moments, was always go to the conventions, always get around your, whatever the franchise is offering. Even if you don't think it's the greatest thing at times, be there, because you're going to get an idea. You're going to get around your peers. You're going to share stories. You're going to learn something from them. You're going to learn something from other people that you're around. And that helps me every year. And so, this will be my 22nd convention. I've never missed one, and I hope to never miss one.
That's incredible. Was there a point where things started to feel predictable and repeatable? Like, how many years? Because I get asked that question a lot when people come in. They're like, "Yeah, am I going to be able to start, printing money in 6 months or 12 months or 24?" And I know that differs across brands and
Yeah.
stage, and I mean, so many factors go into it. But for you, when did it feel like, "Hey, I got a really good grasp on this. It's repeatable. It's somewhat predictable. I've got mastery, or not, maybe not even mastery yet, but control of the levers to a degree, and
Yeah.
I'm coming into my own."
Again, I think there's been a couple points where I've kind of felt that way. I enjoyed making money, but I didn't make it my number one priority. And so I would continue to invest and make future state movements, as opposed to like, well, let's just tighten up now and make some good money. And there's always these levels where you get to a point in sales where you can be more profitable if you tighten the belt a little bit and you get good at what you're doing. But I would say, once I'd been in this for 5 or 6 years, it was at a level where it's like, hey, this is feeling pretty good, but I wasn't making great money, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
basically had a job. basically only paying the same thing I had when I started. So it wasn't a great job, right? But all the responsibility and all the investment. And then I kind of took it to another level and said, okay, this is a little bit better, right? The money's a little bit better, but I can just keep investing it and growing it. So, I don't know that I could say you ever get to that point because I don't want to ever stop growing and trying to push to the next level. But I will say that you can pick where you want that level to be, right? And everyone's got to make that decision for themselves. Like what's best for you and your family and what level do you want to be at? Does your spouse work? Does your spouse not work? My wife
Yep.
didn't work, so I had to go grind it all the time. It was a decision we made to be with our family, but I was on the grind. I had to go out and make sure that we were growing, 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 and hitting that. And so that was additional motivator for me as the provider for the family. So again, I think it went in stages. Like after 4 or 5 years, yeah, I got this thing down. I can keep going. I could have stopped right there and made okay money and been decent for a long time, right? And with just incremental small growth. And so then I took it to the next level, and we got there. I'm like, man, this is great. I've never seen this level of profits or this level of things, but it wasn't enough. Let's just keep pushing to the next. Buy more equipment, adding more people, getting sales to go outside and bring in new customers. So it's an evolution, I think, and every business is going to be a little different depending upon the franchise model. But it's really just a matter of what are you looking for? Do you want this to just be predictable income that stays pretty much the same, or are you on a constant growth and you want to continue to see that, and you can put in the hours and the energy to do that? And so I think each person has to kind of make that decision once they're in the business of where they are. I do think every franchise is going to give you an opportunity to get where you get comfortable with it, and then you got to decide: do I buy another unit? Do I invest in my own unit? Depending upon the brand that you're at, what do I want to put back in, and what level am I willing to invest of myself, as well as the money to do that.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I love about, I mean, one, entrepreneurship in general, but franchising especially, is I hear
Mhm.
stories of, people come onto our show and, they've got one unit and they're working to replace their income from their corporate job. And like, that's the goal. And that's a great goal to have.
Mhm.
Others come on and they're like, I started out with one and I knew I wanted to get to five. And now I have 120. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's an empire. Like that is a
Right.
full blown multi-$100 million a year in revenue business. And I am
Mhm.
just like, and the individual I'm thinking of started 7 years ago. It's like, how did you, I
Wow.
mean,
Wow.
he's an investment banker type. And so he raised a lot of outside capital.
Yep.
So his ownership's diluted, down to 30 to 50%, but he's
Mhm.
got a smaller piece of a much bigger pie
Right.
and
Right.
he's comfortable with that and just the way he attacked it. So you hear all these different ways to do it. And that's what I love is like the sky is the limit. That's what's great about
Mhm.
I think America and the American dream in general, but also just what the franchise model and entrepreneurship in general has allowed people to go do is you kind of can take it wherever you want to go if you're willing to do the effort and
Absolutely.
work and get after it, which I think is a perfect segue into something you mentioned earlier, which was you've started to add more units and territories for Fast Signs, and on
Mhm.
top of that, you've also started looking at another brand, or you're involved in another brand, Rolling Suds now. When was that the right moment for you? What
Sure.
sparked it? When did you start thinking
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah. So, 2020, obviously we all remember that year for a different reason, but, 2 years prior to that, the franchise that was originally owned by my wife's aunt and uncle had sold a couple times and a new buyer had bought it. And I had met with him, and we joke about it all the time because he's now my business partner. But the first time we were set up to meet, he stood me up and didn't even show up. And I'm calling him like, where are you at, man? He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I got tied up. I can't make it. I'm like, okay, no problem. Then the second time we finally set up a chance to meet, he comes right in and he's like, "We should merge." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, buddy! You just bought this business, right? Like, you need to figure out what you're doing here and how things are going." And that was like 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. So then 2020, we connected at convention, and he'd been doing it for 2 years. He kind of got all the issues out of the way, was starting to get to profitability again. He had a high volume center, and so they were about the same volume as us, same number of people, similar equipment. And so we just got talking at convention, and he said, we talked about merging. What are your thoughts? I'm like, I would love it because I was looking for a new challenge, right? I was getting bored at that point. We were profitable. I was making the best money I'd ever made. We were in the top 25 revenue for the whole country with a single center, and so I felt good, right? I was comfortable, but I'm not a guy that can sit comfortably for very long. I just was like, I need something else. I'm bored, right? This is too easy at this point. And I'm not even saying I was doing a great job. I just was like, I need something else, So we started talking at convention, and we said, okay, let's have a serious conversation when we get back, after convention. And so within a couple of weeks, obviously COVID hit and kind of changed everything. But we stayed connected, and we're talking a lot about how we're treating our employees. What are we doing with funding the business? What are we doing? And fortunately for us in the sign world, COVID was the best, worst thing that could have happened. I mean, everybody needed signs, and we had to figure out how do we adjust and pivot to make this work to service our customers, to get them the signage they need, and also obey the laws and know what's going on in our communities. So it was a crazy year, but we grew a lot. We all did. So we went through growth. In the meantime, he was a super visionary. I thought I was a visionary, and I met him, and I'm like, holy cow, you think at a different level than I ever could. And so he, in the meantime, partnered with another guy out on the West Coast, and he had come from the photo world. He had a photo business that did servicing of cameras and digital prints, and like mugs and different things that you can get made, and had storefronts. And he knew a guy out west who was in the same business and had started a Fast Signs or bought an existing Fast Signs and had seen tremendous spike up in his growth. So he just called him and said, "Hey, do you want an East Coast partner?" And he was having conversations, in there, and they agreed to do something. They bought a business here in Lancaster, and then moved forward with having an East Coast provider for one of his large clients. And they started doing that partnership. And I didn't know anything about it because we hadn't connected. We were just both really busy. But then I got wind of it when my franchise business consultant called me to say, "Hey, I'm leaving Fast Signs." And he was great. He'd been with me for 7 years. He was the best one I'd had in my 18 years up to that point. And he says, "I'm leaving Fast Signs. I'm going to work for somewhere." I said, "Where are you going?" He tells me he's going to work for Wes, who's down the road. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? So I called him up. And I was like, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, come on over. I'll show you." So I came over, and he showed me the place that they had bought. He now had 3 locations locally because just to service the need that they had, they bought an existing business and were kind of rolling them all together. And they grew like 60% out of that new business that they had just bought by moving some of the business to the East Coast. And so it was crazy. I mean, stuff was happening all over the place. And we're sitting in his office, and he's like, "Do you still want to merge?" And I'm like, "Well, let's have a conversation," right? So we started talking, and they were pretty heavily into one customer that was servicing East and West Coast. I, on the other hand, had a very diverse book of business with some very large clients in different industries, that were national players. And so I said, "Well, let's talk about it." And we agreed to do a merge and create a partnership, in the Lancaster location between our 2 centers coming together, not the one out west, but he would be a partner in that venture because he was already part of that group.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was unique to me. I was in a faith-based peer group of CEOs, and we were meeting, and I shared this opportunity with them, and they all said, "You're crazy. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Don't do it." But I didn't feel that way. And there was one guy in the group that said, "Why wouldn't you? This is the smartest thing that you could possibly do." So I was weighing all this in my head. I'm blowing this up while still trying to operate the business and not tell anybody what's going on because I didn't want it to get out.
Yeah.
We're meeting on the other side and talking through negotiating how's this going to look, what's going to happen. But, just in my gut, I felt I was being called to something bigger and that this was a chance to try something new, and test my talents and see what I could do differently. And ultimately said yes. And we met at a diner. It's funny. Dan flew in from the West Coast, and we're having dinner at a diner. It's old 50s looking diner. And we're back in the corner booth. And literally, like, they said, "Well, here's what we've been thinking. We've been talking about this, John. This is what we want to do." And they pull out a napkin, and they write some stuff on the napkin. They slide it across to me, and I'm looking at it, and it had the partnership percentages and how we were going to structure it. And I said, "Let's do it." And so, like, it was literally this napkin meeting where we passed it back. We don't have the napkin anymore, which is crazy.
Oh, no.
We literally signed it there and said, "Let's do it," and then started moving the wheels and getting the lawyers involved and getting everything set up to make this work. And that was what kicked off the new trajectory that we've been doing since the end of 2021.
Wow. And looking back on that, like, has it materially changed where you think you would have been had you stayed at it alone, essentially, or,
Oh my
as what you were
gosh,
doing?
like far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Now, I can't say it's going to happen to everyone, right?
Right.
But I would have had. I think about that often. I'm like, what would I be doing right now if I was still just me in York, Pennsylvania, running my Fast Signs? And I have no doubt I would have doubled my sales since then. I would be more successful than I was. I would have had great cash flow with a better team than I had at the time. Probably would have bought a building and moved out. So I knew where the business plan was taking me.
Yeah.
This just pivoted, right, and said, let's try something different. So now here I am. We have 3 locations in Lancaster, 1 location in York. They're about 20 minutes apart. Combined, I went from having 13 employees myself to now we're managing 45
Okay.
combined. And
Wow.
by the middle of or actually first quarter of 22, we were up to 60 employees. So we're scaling fast. We're hiring as quick as we can to try to keep up. 4 locations. We're moving things everywhere. I mean, it was a hot mess. And so I'm getting pulled in so many directions. We had agreed, like, I'll take sales, you take operations. He was
Yeah.
very good at operations. I was not. I was much more focused on sales and customer service and how do we make sure that the stuff gets done. And so I went from having 4 people on my sales team plus myself to 21 between the different units. And like, these aren't all salespeople. They're kind of like customer service. They're kind of project managers. They're all over the board, different talent levels. And I got to figure this out and say, what are we doing here? So it definitely gave me the challenge I was looking for, and caused me to say, wow, what is going on? And that was just in the first 3 months. Right? So it was a whirlwind. But yes, it was far more than I could ever imagine. I look back even now, 3-4 years, and it's like, it's unbelievable. I'm truly blessed. So
I want to the extent that you're comfortable with it, would love to get more into some of the numbers too. It's like, what did, how many locations is it again today that you guys are operating?
We have three locations, 2 with operations that produce signs, and we're opening a 4th one now in Bentonville, Arkansas. So we have Everett, Washington, which is the West Coast, just north of Seattle, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Those are our 2 production facilities. We got about 50,000 square feet at both of those of actual production facility and office space. Then we have York, which is just an office, basically a service office to the territory that we have. And then we've just acquired Bentonville, Arkansas to develop in 2026. So 4 franchise locations that, as far as the territories are concerned. We do treat it a bit differently. Franchises are very particular about where the sales go, who credits what they do. We're one company, so it's hard for us. Now we only have two facilities that are actually producing, and they've recognized that makes it weird for those other 2. But where they acquire customers, we just count towards that base, but everything else goes through the other 2, primarily in terms of revenue and dollars and where the sales are.
Okay. I would be curious, what was like the average revenue per your territory when it was, just you?
Yeah.
And then what is that now across the 3?
So maybe I'll walk you through the time, because it sounds crazy if I just told you where we are now. But so I lost my earpods. Sorry. Can you still hear me?
Yep. I can hear you.
So I was doing about $2.5 million in sales with 13 employees in York, Pennsylvania. Wes was doing about $2.5 million in sales with about 12 employees in Lancaster. Him and Dan purchased a company doing $1.5 million.
Okay.
So they're at about, was that 4 million in Lancaster, with about 20 employees, give or take. And when they brought some of that business over to the East Coast that Dan was doing, because Dan was at about, I think at that point, he was probably doing about 8 million. He was growing rapidly on the West Coast. So they brought some of that business over to the East Coast. So they started growing and ramping up their people. When we merged together, like I said, we were at about 45. We went up to 60, 65 really quick, because our large customer was saying they were going to do stuff, but then it didn't happen. So we actually had to scale back a little, which was very hard to do.
Yeah.
But when we combined, if you added Lancaster and York together, our revenues would have been about 10 million when we got together.
Okay.
And only 2.5 of that was mine. So they scaled fast. In 1 year, they grew about $6 million. It was insane.
Wow.
So we're about $10 million together. We got about 65 employees. And that next year we did 12.5 million when we were fully together, as one unit. We did have to do some minor layoffs. It's the only one we've had to do, thankfully, over the last 4 years, because we just scaled too fast. We added too many bodies and we made bad decisions around that. And so we did about 12.5 in just Lancaster. Now Daniel's growing out there, but we're not combined. He's a partner in us. We're not a partner in him. We're just consulting with him as he's growing. And he's growing faster than we are. So we did 12.5. Then the next year we did 15.5. And then in 2024, we merged everyone together.
Okay.
So if we go back and we kind of look at our combined sales, 2022, if you look at all of it together, including Daniel, even though we weren't merged together, we were about 30 million.
Okay.
Combined revenue and sales between the 3 locations. And then the next year we stayed flat. 21, 22 was pretty flat. Like, we didn't really grow. And I love telling the story, because it's the truth of what happens when you're at this scale. Is in Lancaster in 2022, we moved, we closed buildings, we hired, we had to fire, we had to make changes. We did $12.5 million and didn't make any money. That's painful. That's very painful. Like we're sitting there every month, like, what is going on? We're okay. We know we're doing. We're doing this. We're buying this. We had to do this. We bought all this equipment. But it's a hard pill to swallow when you got to sit there and look at your P&L and say, I didn't make any money and I did 5 times more than I was doing or 4 times more than I was doing. What did I just do? Right? Was this the right decision?
Was it all the reinvestment into consolidating the business and basically the strategic maneuvers you guys were making? Was that why? Because you're reinvesting so much, or was it also part of post-COVID kind of fallout and people were less active? Or
yeah, I mean, I wasn't less active. I mean, we still had plenty of orders coming in. It was more of figuring out how to operate at a higher level that we didn't manage well enough because we had to just keep doing stuff. So obviously, if it's CapEx, it's not hitting the P&L. But we did put a lot of moving expenses in there, and move was expensive. It took a lot of profits out of the business for that. But it was just ramping up in people, probably paying people too much, promoting people to levels they didn't deserve to be at yet. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, right? And we're using EOS and we're trying to like get this together and stay organized and have a plan and strategy, but we're flying by the seat of our pants in so many of these decisions. So yeah, it was a lot of reinvestment. It was a lot of overhires, figuring out how to pay people right. And for us, buying the goods and people are your 2 biggest costs. And so when we were off on those, we were off, and we were buying in bulk, but we weren't getting the best deal, or you're buying last minute and having to overnight it, or we're saving the customer's butt. So we're shipping things out overnight and paying tremendous fees for that. So there was a number of mistakes that we were making that were killing our profits in the process. But we knew we could get there because we'd see the light at the end of the tunnel as we were scaling up and doing these different things that would help us to, achieve where we wanted, to get to. So that was, 2022. Again, that was just us. So it was 30 million. And then we did 30 million in 22. Then we jumped to, I'll make sure I get my years right, 45. Wow. Then went to 59. And then this last year we did 87.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So it's been an amazing scale that I am still just like, I can't even hardly say it. I'm like, I don't even want to spit these words out because they don't sound right from me doing 2.5 million with 13 employees.
5 years ago, right? 6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, and now our goal this year is, over 100 million. Right. And we feel it's very much in reach. So yeah, it's been an amazing scale that has taught us so much. And just been eye-opening. How do you do this, and what do you learn from it?
You're making money on the 80 million now, right?
Yeah, we're making money, yes, sir.
Well, something I want to call out too is I've had a number of mentors. I mean, Cal, the story that I shared of him going from 0 to 120 locations in 7 years. One of our investors was the guy who started Fast Med Urgent Care. So it was the second largest standalone urgent care business in the country at one point. And the story he told me, and this was 10 years ago, it stuck with me, is he was going to med school at, I think it was Princeton. I mean, he was he's a smart guy, and he was doing his kind of rotations in an emergency room, and he just saw how terribly run it felt like, and people not getting care and the quality of it. So he drew up a quick business plan of like, what if this was just like a standalone thing, and it was for like all the minor stuff that people come in. It's not actually emergency room necessary things, and we could take some of that activity and volume out of the emergency room and still provide good care. And he showed one of his professors at Princeton, and they looked. This was long. He's this was probably 30 years ago. And he showed his professor at Princeton. He said, yeah, look, everything you're showing me makes sense. The numbers make sense. I would not be a doctor. I would drop out and go do this. And so that's what he did. He dropped out of med school, went and started Fast Med. But he only had he opened one urgent care. And I think that doctor might have invested in it. And it did really well, but they were so focused on how do we perfect this and get in compliance and regulation, and how do we, this was new at the time. Those standalone urgent care businesses didn't really exist. And he didn't open his second until I think 5 or 6 years after the first one. And then he opened a third, the year after he opened the second one. And then within a 3-year or 4-year period, he was up to 150 locations open. It's just it's similar to your story where so much of the learning, has to happen. You have to have those years and years and years of experience and practice and discipline. And then it's the overnight, 15-year success that happens when you're in those later stages of the learning in the career. I mean, look what you guys have done in a short order, but you probably wouldn't have been able to do it if the three of you didn't collectively have that decade plus of experience of knowing what to do. And now you guys are just much better operators, more experienced, et cetera, for it. Yeah. But good things take time.
No, and I think too, like obviously owning a business it's a lonely world, right? And so if you don't have peer groups, if you don't have people, like sometimes your spouse doesn't understand. You try, but sometimes she won't always get it. Sometimes your friends certainly don't. And a lot of peer groups you run around with, like that aren't in the business world, you can't talk to about some of the stuff. You certainly can't talk to your employees about it, right? So partnership alone is something you have to be very careful with because probably more fail than succeed. In fact, I tell my guys this all the time. That first day of business school, when I was in college, the guy comes out and we're talking about business, how to operate businesses, LLC, S corp, partnerships, and he's like, "Don't go into partnership with anyone that you wouldn't let marry your daughter." And like I was 18 years old, I'm like, I don't know what that means. I don't have a daughter. I'm not worried about this. And now I tell to the guys that I'm like, that's really creepy because I don't want you to marry my daughter, but I know what they're saying. So, because my daughter now is 16 years old and like is going to have a spouse someday. And I'm like, wow, I'm glad I heard that because it did change my thinking of who I would go into partnership with. But creating the partnership was a game changer for us because we each had very unique talents and we were able to come together. Thankfully, the three of us aren't big egos. We're not driven by the show or the glitz or, even the money all the time. And so we were able to work well together and to handle criticism from one another and talk through things. But the brain power when the three of us got together was through the roof because we could solve problems faster than anybody else in that business and we could execute it quicker. Just because of that, what you said, those 10 years of experience, the grind that we had, the pain that got us to that point that now it's like, yeah, we're doing 12 million and we're not making money, but we're going to fix this fast. And we did, right? The very next year, it was like way more. And then the next year, it's even more. And now it's where it needs to be, right? And so there is power in that, but you have to be careful, right? Because there's also danger in partnership. And we don't want to see someone fail by jumping into something prematurely, probably like I did. There was a lot of consternation and prayer and thought about it, but it was really pretty quick as far as how it happened. But it does work when it's done right. And there is power in having that mind share together.
There is a lot. I'm glad you said that. It's something I, talk about a lot and really preach about a lot is that the power of multiple partners, co-founders can really work if you complement each other. If you guys, I tried doing my previous business with 3 consultants from EY. You can imagine how that went. It was 3 of the same type of skill and personality, and no, this is how you should build the model. And this is 3 people with the same skill set. And as soon as I started working with people that had the same kind of ethics, beliefs, egos, etc. Those parts I think need to be the same, but as far as what you're actually good at and your skill set when you bring to the table should be vastly different. It should be very, and that combined is such a powerful combination. And I hear people say like, "Oh, don't get into business with friends or family." And I don't know if I fully believe that. I think it's don't get into business with friends or family if they have the same skill set as you. But if you guys have complementary skills and you have the same beliefs though, and you have the trust of a family member, like it's actually a really good thing. Like I've built businesses with my childhood best friend a number of times, and we are a powerhouse duo. Like it's because we have the same ethics, the same egos. We're not afraid to be wrong. We believe each other. We trust each other, but we're good at very different things. And like that's the key. It's that set of ingredients that make the whole thing work. I'm curious, and I know we've got probably another 5-10 minutes or so, but prior to the partnership, and I guess that year that you guys had 12 million in revenue but no profits, I think people hear that and say, "What did your families do? You didn't pay yourself that year." I'm assuming you guys still had salaries.
Pay ourselves.
You had salaries, right? So I wanted to ask that. You guys still took salaries, and how did the
reasonable salaries? But
right. And so so you guys, it's not like no one's eating dinner or anything. So I want people listening to hear like, hey, even if the business is breaking even, a lot of times franchisees and franchise owners, they're still drawing a salary. I think in the ETA world, it's called seller discretionary earnings or SD. And you're using some of the business expense for travel and other stuff. And so I want people hearing that they're like, hey, even when the business might be having a flat year, there's still opportunity to pay yourself and live.
W2 salary all the time. That's one of the beauties of small business and franchising. So yes, we always made enough money to take care of things. You got it. That's right.
How did the EBITDA, I guess, and whether you can share numbers or just percentages, like how did that expand over time? You shared revenue.
Sure.
I'm curious, when you were on your own as a solo operator, what did it look like then versus that trajectory you walked through a second ago on the revenue side?
So, FastSigns always has their range of what they say is average and then where they say that, the top performers are at. And the beauty of being a franchise is you can look at the top performers and say, okay, are they doing what I would do, or are they doing something different? Because usually, small network, you can find out how they're doing it. The top performers typically were extremely hard workers. They wouldn't hire as many people. They would do a lot of work themselves. They would be very lean, and that's fine. That's how they got to that top tier. The average was the average, right? It's what everybody else did, and some were high. No, I always had the belief I would always be a half a person ahead so that I wasn't getting crushed and I could think about the business and work on the next thing. And I was always investing in new equipment because I knew that if I stayed ahead of the curve, I would be there. And and so that affected my profitability at times, but I always ran somewhere between 15 and 20%. So I wasn't that far off the average, but I was still doing fine in terms of what I took home and how I was, feeding my family and doing these trips and going to do the things that I did. So we were a little below what FastSigns would have said that we should be at, especially as I was growing in my own volume, but I was comfortable and happy with that because of what I was doing with the money. When we combined, obviously we had the 1 year where we didn't do very well. And Daniel even had a year when he did, I think, 13 million, 14 million and didn't make money. Right. So we had two different growing organizations that were hurting because we weren't able to manage it fast enough and keep up with the growth. But then it's continued to grow from there and go back to where it should be and exceed that, right? So over the last 3 years, we've seen it go from nothing basically in 1 year to 10 to 15%, up to 16 to 17%, 18%, and now we're well over 25%.
Wow.
So it has grown tremendously as time has gone on, and that's only attributed to the continued scale, the continued growth, the continued thought process, and focus on that. We've got a whole finance team now, right? So we have people that are watching it to make sure we're not making bad decisions, and we've scaled that up as we've grown, but we didn't have that when we started because we just came together and said go. And we had smart people doing the accounting and they were giving us the reports, but we didn't know how to make the right decisions because it was happening so fast. So we knew it would get back to where it was, or we would shut things down because we weren't going to let it operate at 10 to 12%. That just wasn't acceptable to us. And so we were going to find a way to make it get back up to at least the average. In our mind, 20%, we will not be below that or we're in trouble because we're not even hitting the average FastSigns at this scale. We need to be well above that in terms of how we are operating excellence with what we're doing. And so now we've been able to put that in place and keep developing that over the past several years.
That's just phenomenal. I mean, I love hearing the story of, again, this 22-year overnight success that you've had. I mean, as we start to kind of wind down or wrap up, for those listening that regardless of where they are in the journey, maybe they've got 6 units of a breakfast concept, or maybe they're at EY right now and they're exploring going and doing their own thing. Like, what's like the one or two pieces of advice that you have for someone exploring either their first franchise or it might be their 7th and they're looking to expand upon? And that advice might be different, but speak to those, I guess, 2 people.
We'll talk to 2 different ones there. First, let's start with the guy or gal that's possibly looking to do something new, right? They want to get into it and they're looking at franchising. I think the biggest thing to make sure you do is explore the brand thoroughly and talk to a lot of owners, right? I was an auditor, so I called a bunch of franchises because I'm like, well, if I get one bad one, I'm going to call 5 more. If I get one good one, then I can check 5 off. And so I called a ton of franchisees and just asked them. They have to give you the list, right? They gave me the list and then I could call any of them. And they were very open. They would share a lot of things and help with that process. That gives you a picture of the different types of people that are out there. And I got some bad ones. I got people that said, don't do that. Just be an accountant. You'll make more money. It's way easier. And then I had to process that as a 22-year-old, like, what? Why is this guy even saying that? But that's out there.
What kind of questions did you ask them, if you remember?
Again, the naivety. I don't even remember what I was asking, but I'm sure I was asking about how did the performance match up? How's the franchise doing to support you? What have been your biggest challenges that you face? I think it would be important now to dive into, has it met your expectations, and what is your life like? Like, how many hours are you working in a week? And is that by choice or by demand? Like, you can't get out of it. And what is your vision for the business? Like, asking those kind of questions, I think you'll get to the heart of it versus just the brick and mortar operations questions. If you have time for those, get to it. It is important, but the franchise probably isn't lying about the data because it's data, right?
Yep.
So really try to dive into the heart of the people you're talking to and where they are and getting to what makes them feel successful or what makes them feel like they're struggling and why. Because you'll learn from that. Even the ones who are upset maybe at the franchise or who are struggling, you're going to learn something from that you can take away if you go down that path to get better and to avoid maybe some of those traps. So that'd be my advice kind of to somebody coming in. And then the other big one is do not underestimate sales, right? I don't care what business you're in, you have to have sales. So whether you're running a restaurant concept, you got to get customers in that door. How do you do that? How do you make it exceptional for them? Even if it's over over and above what the franchise tells you to do. Find a way to create an experience that everyone will want to come back to, whatever business you're in, and you will grow. If you get lazy on that, you're going to get lazy on sales and you're going to lose profits. So that'd kind of be my advice for that new one coming in. I think for somebody who's looking to scale, again, it's why do you want to scale? Really do the why. If it's just for the money, find a way to get more profits where you're at if you can, right? It may be easier for your life, but that may be the only way to do it. And if it is, then be very strategic about it. Think about what you're doing. If it's just you want more challenge like I did, man, go for it. But just have a plan around how do you get back to the comfort that you want for a period, because you're going to want to go through that churn and burn and then comfort, churn and burn and then comfort. If you don't get that, you're just going to burn out, right? So you have to be careful of that, especially as things get bigger and bigger. I remember talking to another franchisee whose payroll was at the time, $20,000 every 2 weeks, and mine was like 4. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, how do you afford 20,000?" He said, "Look, I don't care what you do; it's all relative. You get to my scale, it's going to be the same, and mine will be 4 times yours." And eventually, and I look at it now, and I say the same thing to franchisees. They're like, "Well, you're on a different level." I say, "Hang on a second. It's the same problems. It's just relative scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
I still got to make payroll every 2 weeks. I still have employees that cause problems. I still have vendors that don't deliver on time. It's not a different business. It's just a different scale." So think through that as you're looking to expand and as you're looking to take on those things. And I think it'll make it easier as you go through that decision-making process.
Did it feel like when you talk about scale, like the problems you had when it was 4,000 every 2 weeks versus however many tens of thousands it is every 2 weeks, like, is the problem any different? Like, is it harder? I mean, some people say more money, more problems, right? Like it's bigger, there's more people. So like, is it the same problems, but the frequency of the problems are greater because of, the scale is just greater? Or, how would you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't think, I wouldn't say more money, more problems. I think it's just, it can get amplified, right? I mean, when it comes to having more employees, you have more people to manage, right? So you have to have better systems, right? And that's something I learned is that while the franchise will provide you with a core system and some are better than others, you've got to systematize your business even further, right? So whatever you're doing, you need to document that down to the minute little thing you can do, because every time you bring somebody new in, it's going to just suck your time if you don't have that ability to document your processes. And it's also going to change the way that person A versus person B does it. And so that's where the problem comes in at scale, I think, is that you have confusion and you have lack of clarity amongst all the different people in the organization, and they're not doing and rowing in the same direction that you're trying to get to. And so documentation, SOPs, learning processes, getting better at what you're doing, and then having one clear vision that you're shooting for as opposed to 75 different projects that you want to get completed is really going to be the key as you grow. So not more money, more problems. I would say more money, strategic challenges that come into place, right? Because it's a lot more things you got to manage at once that you need systems to help keep in place.
Yeah, I love that. All right, to wrap up, I have just a few quick, like, kind of lightning round, quick thought questions. The first one is, what do you think the least glamorous part of owning a business is?
The least glamorous part? I think that's a good question. I mean, probably just all the little things you don't think of that have to just get done, right? I mean, down to like cleaning the toilets when there's only 5 people and making sure it looks nice and it's not messy, because that's how I was raised. My employees probably didn't have that, same upbringing. And so you got to kind of teach them along and do the stuff, even if it seems like maybe you want them to do it. But there's also the non-glamorous side of like, learning how to pay taxes and do, take care of the books and do the things that you don't really want to do, but you have to do and do well, or it'll, jump up and bite you. So I think it's all the behind the scene things that take up your time, or that you're sitting at the couch watching TV, working on at night, or, early in the morning in the office at 4 a.m. when everybody else is sound asleep, trying to just have 3 hours of peace and quiet before the noise starts. Like, that's not very glamorous, but it's very important, right? And so I think that's part of what has to happen to create that customer experience.
Yeah, that's a great answer. What would you, if you could go back and tell 2004 Jon, a little bit of advice in one sentence, what would you leave him with? What would you tell him?
I would tell him to be more direct, right? I was my weakest part of management. I'm a little too empathetic, a little too concerned about how they feel about what I'm saying. And so I wouldn't just come out and say, like, you suck at this, you need to get better, let's create a plan. I would just beat around the bush and try to make them realize they sucked at it, as opposed to just telling them you're not doing a good job, right? And that was just a character flaw of mine that I had to learn how to develop. And even 20 years later, I'm still learning. And I just told my VP of sales yesterday, I'm like, hey, I didn't do a good job at that last year when I was in your seat, and I'm a lot better at it now. So I'm trying to be, more forthcoming and just say, I'm going to tell you what I think you need to hear. understand that this is just what I'm observing and I want to get better at it, but let's talk about it. Let's see where, if you agree with me or not. And I learned that lesson through a number of different ways, but basically hearing people say that their best mentors weren't there to praise them and tell them you're doing a great job. They told them what they needed to fix. And I did not do a great job of that. So as I reflect back, I would say, be more direct, tell people what they need to hear. You're going to make them better, not worse, even if it's hard to hear.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think conflict is hard for so many people. And it's counterintuitive because at the end of the day, if you have good intentions, you want that person to be better. You yourself want to be better, but then you avoid doing this thing that will make them better and yourself better because it's conflict. And so it's this like mental gymnastics you have to play to accept that, hey, this is a good thing for all of us. Just deliver it with kindness, the best you can.
Yes. Yeah.
Last two, if FastSigns disappeared tomorrow, what would you build or what would you work on next?
It'd be something related to sales because I just love talking about a product that I'm, passionate about. I like teaching, so it would probably be some sort of, I don't want to say consulting because that word's overused, but more of like a funnel based, hey, this people need this teaching and I'm going to show them how to do it. That'll help them grow their business, right? Some of the things that I put in place when I was dirty in the trenches and felt horrible, I've got industry experience now. And so how could I teach other business owners how to do that? I'd probably do something along those lines while still investing in brick and mortar because I do believe there's still true value there that a lot of people just poo-poo because they don't think the margins are as good. But I would definitely be still invested in some kind of brick and mortar business that's out serving the community and serving the people.
Love that. And the last one is, what does success look like for you now? I mean, you've built this huge business with your partners and it sounds like beyond what you had ever imagined. Has your definition or of how you define success, has that changed?
I don't think so, because I think at the end of the day, success is whatever you want to make it to be, right? So for me, it was I want to be growing in whatever I'm doing. I want it to challenge me on a regular basis, and I want to impact lives, right? So our core values are based around our main statement, which is improving lives together. And so if I'm going to have something that is benefiting other people, I want them to have an improved life around it. So that to me, that's success. The people around me are getting better. I'm being challenged in what I'm doing, and then hopefully monetary value comes along with that, which is always a plus. So
I love that answer, and you and I are very much cut from the same cloth. I have two older brothers, and one of my brothers thinks, he's like, oh, you're successful because he thinks it's money. Like everyone thinks success is money, and I'm like, money is part of, I think, as you build something big, it comes with it, but for some people that is the motivation. They're money motivated, and that's okay. I think I don't really fault people who feel that way. I'm very similar to you though, that I just want to be challenged. We get this life that we have right now, and I want to live it as fully as I can and grow and develop. And then with that, I know impact will come. And Mark Cuban has this line where he says, the best thing you can do to contribute to society or impact, communities around you is to build a big effing company. And the reason he says that is because it's going to do all the stuff that you've experienced. Like how many people you've employed and given jobs and opportunities and have developed, and they've grown and become better skilled individuals as a result. And look how many customers you've helped, and look how much you as an individual have grown and your families benefited from that growth. And it's just, the bigger you do something, the more impact it's going to have. And like, I love that mentality of just like, I just want to grow and more. And not that because it's not enough, it's just the journey and that pursuit of it is so enjoyable, fulfilling, and all the other parts, come with it. The money comes, the, impact comes, the flexibility comes, but it's the idea of just this growth mindset of, continually pursuing excellence.
Yeah. And to your point, like sometimes it's the littlest things that can impact your people, and that we shouldn't forget as owners and as franchisees and future people that have it is, like something simple. I still handwrite a happy birthday card to every employee, and we've got 234 across 2 locations, and rapidly expanding. But I get so many messages back that people just are floored that I would take the time to do that. So just don't forget the power of your impact as a leader, even when you have 1 employee and 3 employees. Like praise them, give them acknowledgments when they're due, and even just recognize little things like birthdays and anniversaries and what they're doing to help. And it makes a world of difference, because most people that aren't in our shoes don't have that same level of encouragement and build up in their life, and they will perform well because they love being a part of something that acknowledges and helps them get better.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That same brother I just mentioned, he's told me, because he'll give me advice on certain things. He's a very empathetic person, and he said throughout his career, and he's in his early 40s, he's gotten annual bonuses or, this kind of like financial thing. And he said, the best thing an employer has ever done for me is that my first few weeks on the job, we were just talking about the things we liked. And he'd asked me about certain IPAs or something. And my brother had told him an IPA that he had liked. And a year later, his boss like just randomly came in with a 6-pack of the IPA and gave it to him. And so this thing is, I don't know, $15, $20, $25 at most. My brother said he will always remember that. It was the best thing he's ever received over a $5,000 bonus. Or of course he liked that and wants those things, but he's like, that will stick with me forever because that person listened to me. They cared about me as an individual, and like you just can't replicate that. So I think your advice is spot on. And Jon, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this. I mean, I've learned a ton from you and your story and your journey. And like I said at the beginning of the conversation, I really appreciate you giving your time this way and impacting and imparting on others. Hopefully, a few nuggets in this past hour. Appreciate you doing it.
Well, it's been awesome. I really appreciate you doing this for others, and I hope it's an opportunity for them to learn and grow. And they are welcome to reach out to me directly at any point. I'm sure they can find me on LinkedIn or other places, and I'm always happy to have a conversation and share the ups and downs of everything that we've been through.
I was just going to ask, where can people find you? Is it, Jon on LinkedIn? Is there any other, areas?
Jon Toy on LinkedIn, or they can just email me, jon.toy@concordiaholdco.com. So feel free to reach out directly. I would love any conversations of any listeners, and any way I can help. I'm always happy to help others.
I appreciate that. Thank you again, Jon.
Yeah, great. Good talking to you. Thanks, Alex.